Hello, my name's Gareth Tarr. We're here today to talk about this book here, Sir William Lyons on Jaguar, and I have with me Giles Chapman, who compiled the book, and we're also very lucky to have Michael Quinn, who was Sir William's grandson. So I think, Giles, we'll start by, can you explain what the book's about? Because it's a little bit of an unusual book, really, in a way.
Yeah, it is, and I have to say, unlike all my other books, I didn't write most of it, which makes it one of the most unusual of all. But it's basically a book version of an address that Sir William Lyons gave in 1969, where he stood in front of an invited industry audience and told them how he had founded Jaguar, developed Jaguar, and brought it to, that very day where the first XJ6s were coming off the line in Coventry. So, the sort of one of the world's most fantastic saloon cars, all started with building sidecars in Blackpool. Mm-hmm. And in itself, a story I think a lot of people know already from various Jaguar history books and so on. I certainly know all about it, and it's, to a degree, quite well-trodden story. Right, yeah. But the sort of genesis of it becoming a book was that I found a transcript of this speech, and in fact, here it is. Here is the very document that came to me, and it came to me in some papers from another journalist who sadly passed away, and I had a lot of this guy's stuff to sort out. I was going through all the bits of paper and, binning some of the rubbish and keeping some of the things. And I came across this, and I had actually referred to it before for other writing I've done. But it just struck me newly when I sort of held it and read it again and thought, this is, unlike all the other Jaguar history books, this is the voice of the person who did it. Yeah. And that's what I feel you don't get in most of the other Jaguar writing. And I had a flick through it again, started reading, got absorbed. It has a very specific beginning and a certain end. It doesn't go right up to Jaguar today and so on. And, as I was looking at it, I just thought, well, I'd love to be able to share this with everyone who's interested in Jaguar. Sure. Could we turn it into a book? So that's really was just an accident of finding this document and being struck by how rare it is to get Sir William's actual voice. That's what I liked about it. You mentioned the address was in two parts, really, because the first part, as you say, is the history of Jaguar to date as he gave the speech. Yes. But the second half is about the specialist car, which I guess we can define that a bit later on. But that's perhaps more where we get to hear his own views on the industry and how things. And I thought that was very interesting as well. Yeah. So it's actually in two parts, this speech.
Yeah, and I think that illustrates quite clearly that they are his own thoughts. And this wasn't something that was written for him by
There's no PR people. No,
exactly. It's very much, and there are some insights in there which are quite personal. Yeah. And I think that makes it all the richer. That it's his own thoughts, it's his own telling of the story.
Yeah. I agree, and there's a sort of hinge really in the narrative. The main part is him talking about the history. Then we have this adjunct about the specialist car industry, and to hear him talking about things like the Ford Mustang, and how he'd analysed that, seen what it offered, and was wondering how a company like Jaguar and maybe other car manufacturers were going to learn from this idea of it was personalisation coming into the mainstream. It's very, very very unusual to hear him commenting on such a sort of it's not really a topic to do with SS or D types or anything. Sure. It's to do with the mass market and the specialist market. So I love that extra part. And I agree with you.
I thought so.
And I think at that time he was very preoccupied with the global industry. Right. And that's why he was looking to merge his business, or had merged the business with BMH, and then
we should say that by the time he gave this address, it was already, he'd sold the business effectively.
Effectively.
He was still running.
I would say merged it.
Merged it, yeah.
Rather
Sorry, apologies for my inappropriate language.
But no, he was preoccupied with the global industry, and particularly with America, because he realised very early on that they had to crack America, and that was where the biggest competition was coming from. And he obviously had a keen eye on products coming out of America.
Yeah.
You're right. Hearing him refer to the Mustang is really interesting.
And you know, the Mustang had followed by the Capri, had set this very unusual new offering, whereas you could buy the basic car and then customise it any way you want with different engines, fastback, convertible, all sorts of things. Very unheard of in the mainstream car business.
Right.
You know, maybe he thought that they pinched a bit of his original thinking for that, and you know, was perhaps wondering how he's going to respond.
Yeah.
You know, but actually, to do with the takeover, there's a great account of the negotiations of Jaguar and BMC merging in a book called The Lay-In Papers. I don't know if you've ever read that.
By Graham Turner.
Yeah, that's right. And it's quite a sort of cheap and cheerful little paperback. I bet you can get it for a couple of quid in, you know, a charity shop near you, pretty much. But it's very interesting how he sort of steered a lot of autonomy still, you know, for his beloved Jaguar within this enormous great group. I love reading that little retelling of how he negotiates it, because again, that's another side that you don't really hear too much about, I feel.
Michael, you're obviously his grandson.
Well, one of, I should point out.
Yeah, sure.
He has 5 grandchildren, so I try to remind people I'm not the only grandson.
Yeah.
But I am the only one, I guess, of his grandchildren who are actively engaged and interested in that part of the family history.
And what I was going to come on to was, you know, what are your personal recollections of him? Is that what motivated you to go into the industry at all?
Well, yes. I mean, I was always, to say I was highly impressed by him would be an understatement. I mean, just going to Wottonbury Hall as a little kid was an impressive experience. I mean, it was
that was his home, wasn't it?
That was his home in Warwickshire, literally 20 minutes drive from Brown's Lane from his office, where he spent most of his time, and there's no doubt about it. I mean, my mother still says today that they really saw very little of him because he was completely devoted to working there. But you know, we'd go over there for weekends and Easter and Christmas and all that sort of thing, and he was from the Edwardian era, and where children were sort of brought up to be seen but not heard. And he still had a little bit of that approach and attitude. So we really had to mind our P's and Q's. My sister, who's 18 months younger than I, together both made sure we were on best behaviour when we were around there. But having said that, you know, I've got great memories of sitting on his lap, and when I was starting to learn to read, and then if the golf open was on, we could go and watch that with him in his study, making sure, you know, we kept quiet though. So I've got a lot of great memories of him.
Did he ever take you around the factory?
No, well, we got this close to it. I really only had one factory visit when I was probably about 14 or 15, and he was due to take my mother. I went with Mum and a friend of mine, and he was due to take us around. But then we got there, and he'd been called into meetings and things. So sadly, that didn't quite happen. But anyway, we were shown around, my mum and I, and my abiding memories of the trim shop, which was this huge part of the factory, full of ladies with aprons stitching the seats together. Yeah, it was just incredible.
And rows of sewing machines.
Rows of sewing machines. Yeah. So no, you could say I'm his number one fan in a way, and I've made it, my life's work to study what he did, and because I'm such an admirer of what he achieved.
And you're still involved because you have a business that stores Jaguars.
Yeah. So after I did a HND in mechanical engineering, I went to work for a Jaguar dealer in Kensington. And I was there for 30 years, which I don't know where the time went. But for a whole load of reasons, which I won't go into now, that business closed in 2017, and so I started up on my own, my own service and repair business,
right,
specialising in Jaguars, of course.
Going back to the address,
Yeah.
let's concentrate first on the history part first. What do you think we learn from what he says in that address that perhaps wouldn't come out of normal study, or what do we learn about him maybe?
Well, there are two things that struck me immediately about it. One is that his original partner, William Walmsley, doesn't actually get a name check at all.
Right.
Maybe he was useless, but I don't think he was useless. But we join the story at quite a clip at the beginning, and Walmsley is almost sort of being edged. He's not that he's being edged out. I think he edged himself out a little bit. He wanted to do other things in his life, and he could never have sort of envisage what Jaguar would become. So when it came to selling his share of the business to Sir William, or William Lyons as he was at the time, he was happy to go off and do other things.
Yeah.
And I think he got into the caravan industry, and he was interested in model railways, all kinds of stuff, and he just thought, it's never going to get any better than this. I want to go and, metaphorically play golf.
And you get that in family businesses,
Yes.
He wasn't quite the entrepreneur that Sir William was, and therefore didn't have that drive.
No, that's exactly right. And don't forget, there were 10 years between them. And according to my granddad, did start writing some early notes on the business. And it would appear that Walmsley had already had one attempt to set up the sidecar business.
Right.
They lived in Manchester before they moved up to Blackpool. And that hadn't gone very well.
Right.
And then when my grandfather saw his product and said, look, come on, this is amazing, we have to turn this into a bit. You've got a great potential business there. He had to be talked into it.
Yeah.
He didn't really want to do it. And actually, what Grandad did is worked on Walmsley's father. And it was actually Walmsley's father who talked his son into it.
Yeah.
And they got their bank loan, and the rest is business. So I think the rest is history. So I think that the ambition was all on my granddad's side. And I think Walmsley had the skills to get the whole business up and going, the coach-making skills. But after that, it was really my granddad who wanted to leap ahead.
One of the things that came across to me reading that was what an entrepreneur your granddad was. I think one of the things that struck me was they had the sidecar business, and they branched out into sort of coach building, Austin Sevens, and suddenly he gets an order from Henleys for 500 cars and relocates the whole business to Coventry, which must have been a huge disruption, simply because that's where the skills were, that's where his suppliers were, etc.
Well,
that struck me as that's an entrepreneur.
That takes me to the second thing that I take from it, and that is that if you want to read a sort of exciting boy's own story of, being in the pits at Le Mans and, aerodynamic testing of the E-Type, that you're not going to find a lot of that here. There are some models he doesn't even reference at all. I mean, I couldn't find one mention of the Mark X, which was, an amazing car when it came out. He is talking about the building of this business and the route that you have to take as an entrepreneur with some of the good and bad characters who you have to deal with, who challenge you, who perhaps deliver false promises, all sorts of things. He really does talk about what was involved in building that business a lot more than the product actually, really, or even certainly the motor racing and the E-Type side, which I've always felt was a little bit looked after by other people in the company.
Sure.
I mean, I know he liked to have a good set of bumpers on the E-Type, so it looked really peachy. But the E-Type wasn't strictly a Lyons car in the way that some of the others had been. So that's what I really find interesting, and because it's in the first person, it's coming straight from the horse's mouth for a change, which is great. Yeah. So talking about things like the purchase of Daimler and integrating all of that into the Jaguar system, even including buses, and things. You don't really think about that very much.
And of course,
do you?
famously, his board had no idea he was doing it. They read about it in their morning paper.
What's that, sorry?
The Daimler Company, which of course, pre-war, was one of our oldest.
It was part of BSA group, wasn't it? Really, it was BSA owned.
Correct. Yeah.
And they owned Lanchester as well. Didn't
they? That's right. And my grandfather really needed more factory space, and Daimler was based at Radford in Coventry, and he wanted that space. So he approached BSA, made them an offer. Actually, they tossed a coin over £10,000 as well, which he won. But he did all this without the board knowing about it.
Right.
And they literally, the day it was announced, most of his board read about it in their paper over on their breakfast. But that's the way he operates.
Sure.
And he was you're absolutely right, he was totally motivated by growing that business.
Yeah.
And we were talking over lunch earlier, Gareth, and you were saying how many people, went racing on the weekends.
Yeah.
And their focus got distracted by that instead of running the business.
They loved to have their real business was racing here at Brooklands, but actually they needed to fund that, but they didn't concentrate on the funding and having to pay employees, but run a business.
Yes.
They didn't want to do that.
So,
you can almost sort of, Enzo Ferrari is a classic example of that. He had a business selling cars to fund his racing, but he had the brains to make sure that the business worked.
Right, yeah. Well, so Grandad in some respects was the opposite. He only sanctioned the racing program because he knew it would support and improve cars. He was more about running the business than going racing.
And do you think he was more a businessman who just happened to be into cars, or was he a car enthusiast who ran a business?
Well, that's a really interesting one, because he designed so much as well.
Yeah.
So was he an artist? Was he a designer? Was he a sculptor? Was he a businessman? Was he a car guy? He started off as a motorcycle guy.
Right.
He used to sprint motorcycles and on the sands up in Morecambe. He did trials and hill climbs and things like that. That led him on to sidecars. That's what kept his eye on that. I think he was a car guy, but he was more interested in growing.
He kept his eye on the business.
I mean, what car guy would let the first car, the C-Type that won Le Mans for the first time in 1951, who would let that go? I mean, they just broke it up. Wouldn't you keep that?
Really? Yeah.
Wouldn't you keep that for yourself if you're a real car guy?
Even though they didn't have the value they do today,
correct.
Sentiment would have. But you go back to Enzo Ferrari. I mean, at the end of the season, he sold his cars off for scrap, didn't he?
Or used the parts.
But there wasn't really
the next one.
The car enthusiasm in the early 50s was quite different to how it is today, because you haven't got this great stretch of history that's built the nostalgia.
Yeah.
He as you rightly say, the C-Type wasn't about. It was built, designed, and raced in the factory alongside all the production cars. It wasn't some place out in the M4 corridor, well away from the factory, where only specialists did it. He wanted all the tech to feed back into the cars, and I think that's an illustration of somebody who, I totally agree with you. He is a car guy. He is. He couldn't be anything but a car guy. But I think he loves the business. He just loves the business he's in. It's a I guess like being you love the TV business and you also like making programs.
Right.
It is possible to do both. Maybe these days car guys don't get anywhere near the treasury in car companies very much.
The other thing, he was born in 1901, so his life very much sort of followed the progression of that industry.
Yeah, it wasn't a brand new industry, but it was still very much in the stages of development in that time. After I guess the First World War, wars always improved technology very rapidly, and I guess by the time he's setting up his business, it's a different world from what it was before the war in terms of the technology and stuff like that. So he was, people like Fiat, for example, the famous factory with the track on the top, that was made in the early 20s. and showed Fiat growing massively at that time. I'm sure the same would be true if you looked at Austin or Morris or whatever, that post-war period, that they were all starting out.
Well, you must have given him a very fun feeling to think that the Mark 7, Mark 8, Mark 9, they beat the pants off every other, not just sports saloon, but every luxury saloon you could buy. Mm-hmm. And, he basically saw off Armstrong, Sigley, Bristol pretty much, certainly Daimler, to sort of surpass all of those with something that he planned. It must have been weird, as you say. He's born in the very early days of the car industry, and when even having a motorbike was something very special. But how must it have felt to sort of fell these competitors one by one, who you've been familiar with since you were a kid?
I think what's astonishing about Jaguar was the actual value of these cars. He was like the E-Type was, compared with an Aston Martin, was very favourable to compare with an Aston Martin. Price-wise, there was a massive difference.
Yes.
And the same trip, you mentioned the Mark 7 or whatever. Some of those were far better, they were far better cars than competitors, but actually were mostly cheaper as well. Well, I don't know how he achieved that.
Well, that's always been a big question. People always wonder how he achieved it. And I remember being in the social club in Coventry in Browns Lane, and one old boy there who retired quite a few years ago said, well, we know how he did it. He didn't pay us much money. And there's no doubt he put the thumb screws on all the component suppliers. Mm-hmm. But it was primarily done because he had meticulous attention to detail. And his hands were all over it. I mean, there are internal memos where he'd walk around the factory at night, and if there were washers spilt on the floor, he would make sure that they were picked up.
Yeah.
He literally went around turning off the lights. Yeah. It was all about being efficient as possible. Mm-hmm. And going back to your comment on the saloon cars, I mean, really, I would contend that it was the saloon cars, the Mark 7, 8 and 9, and the Mark 2s, that was really his primary focus.
Yeah, yeah.
That's what he wanted to create, was a car for the family, mm-hmm. for the family guy, but with a premium edge to it. So in terms of comfort, ride, handling, performance, mm-hmm. And all the woodwork and the leather, that was his primary focus. And the sports cars were really just icing on the cake to draw attention to and to prove.
Yeah, I don't think he was reluctant about doing them, but it seems in a way that the impetus tended to come from his colleagues a little bit, And I always get the feeling that the employees of the company, like the employees of any company run by an entrepreneur, if they're enthusiastic, they're like kids, aren't they? They can definitely have some sweets, but they've got to do their homework first. Yeah. So but it's very important not to kill the buzz in something. And, if you've got people working for you full of good ideas and want to excel, to let them do that also involves a little bit of letting go, doesn't it? A little bit of letting go of control and sort of trusting people you think will grow it. And that's an interesting part of how he operates, because even in his early days, I think as an apprentice, he didn't want to sort of just go and work in the Crossley factory in Manchester and do a boring old apprenticeship. He wanted to get out there and sell the car. So I think he was so much about meeting and assessing other people. Mm-hmm. I don't know if you agree, but and seeing who he could work with, and where he found talent, letting it run.
Definitely. I mean, I would say probably his biggest talent was spotting the right people. Mm. So taking on William Haynes in 1935 to come and design the chassis was a masterstroke, because he was a fantastic engineer. Yeah. And what he did was pretty much give him free rein. So they famously designed the engine together during the war. And I think Grandad was quite prescriptive in what he was looking for, but the details were down to Bill Haynes and Claude Bailey.
And this is the XK engine.
This is the XK engine I'm talking about, of course, which was destined for the Mark 7, the big first saloon. Sure. Now, of course, the first car it went into was an XK120, but that was really only conceived as a showcase for the engine, for the Mark 7.
And then they found they got a hit on their hands.
Yeah, which floored them.
Changed the business of
It did. But it put them on the map. It really put them on the world map. But yeah, no, the team, absolutely vital. You couldn't have done any of this without picking the right people.
And quite a few people who then worked on cars well after his retirement and even after he passed were appointed by him, weren't they? I mean, Keith Helfet, one of the stylists, knew him well, and Bob Knight's a very interesting person who, was a sort of almost a mathematician, but became the MD.
I read the Keith Helfet book. In his introduction into Jaguar, suddenly he's meeting Sir William Lyons. He's been there a few weeks, I think, or something like that.
So he never stopped talent spotting, and there's parallels with a little bit with Colin Chapman, no relation, I should add, who again, gave leeway to lots and lots of people without large salaries.
But you're obviously, as his grandson, he clearly, people were very loyal to him, etc. Did you get a sense of that through knowing him? I mean, obviously the relationship as a grandson is far different to an employee, but I wondered if you've seen those sort of parallels in him.
There's no doubt that he was held in really high esteem, and meeting some of his colleagues, and I did get to meet Bill Haynes and Walter House and quite a few of them, and there's no doubt that Lofty England, of course, they held him in really high esteem.
Right.
Of course, he referred to them all by surname.
Right.
To their faces. So he kept a degree of formality there.
Yeah.
But the last time I saw Bill Haynes was actually on Christmas Day in the house. And I think that was the only time I ever saw any of his colleagues, certainly senior ones, in the home environment. So he kept a sort of a healthy distance, if you like. Mm-hmm. But he treated them, with affection and respect, and that came back. Yeah. And also talking to other trade colleagues, Connolly's, some of the advertising companies, they all held him in high esteem. Yeah. He was one of those people his word was his bond. He would never have gone back on anything that...
And I get the impression, sometimes people think that businesses are run by these big personality characters. And he wasn't really. He was a quiet guy, but obviously determined and very professional about how he went about his business.
Yeah, he was quiet, but he was very determined. Mm-hmm. Although I gather if you did cross him, you might expect a bit of time.
He'd know about it. Okay, before we move on to the specialist car section, do you think there's anything else what else do you draw out of the first part of his address in terms of the history? Is there something else that strikes you rereading that, Giles? Obviously you picked it up.
Well, he had a nemesis or two.
Yeah.
People who, like Sir John Black, who he specifically mentions, who'd be pretty keen to swamp him and stop him in his tracks. I don't think they had the necessary skills or vision. So he does mention those, and they seem to be quite sort of courtly skirmishes.
Yeah.
There's no fists involved.
To mention the background to that,
yeah.
As the coach building business developed, they very much got involved with Swallow, with SS.
Yes.
Standard. And that led to the first Jaguar cars themselves, but they relied on Standard for engines and components. And so Black wasn't, and they did the first chassis, and Black was the MD or whatever his role was of Standard. So that's where that clash that engagement came.
And he very much wanted to buy him out and, remove a rival and a threat to. This is Black, I should say, to his, his progress of his company. He probably thought Jaguar would slot quite nicely into his empire, and Sir William very politely wasn't having any of it.
Yeah.
And interestingly, Sir John Black was incredibly helpful to Grandad getting the fledgling business going. But there did come a point where John Black offered to sell all the plant to Grandpa, which Grandpa immediately wrote a cheque out for and sent lorries round to pick up immediately.
Wow.
Well, because what transpired is, in fact, John Black did realise he'd made a tactical error.
Right.
And tried to change his mind.
I think I read something about that.
Yeah. And Grandpa said, no, sorry, we've shaken
on the
bank. Exactly.
And he was just, years later, he was just as shirty with Morgan. He wanted to grab Morgan as well, and they said, thanks, but we don't want to be taken over.
Right.
So he had a sort of pattern of megalomania, which Sir William was very well equipped to resist. I think so. I like all that, and he doesn't shy away from talking about some of those little things along the way. Everyone who's started a business, I'm sure, faces versions of exactly the same thing, whether it's your shop selling wool or your sort of Elon Musk type company. I wonder how they would have got on.
There was one interesting thing I took out of it, which was he refers to, we were just talking about designing the XK engine during the war, and he does make a comment that it was done against the perceived or the better judgment of the day.
Right.
So in other words, I think there were people who were saying, this is a step too far. Right. You're being too bold and too ambitious. But I would imagine between Haynes and Bailey and a couple of the others, they obviously took a joint decision and said, no, let's do it. And Grandad probably said, look, let's do it. This is going to put us on.
Because the war is going to come to an end, and we want to hit the ground running.
Exactly. Yeah. To be ready for it.
The second part of the address is about specialist car. Now, it seems almost a strange term today. If you said, what's a specialist car, people wouldn't know. What do you think we mean by a specialist car, and was being defined in that respect? How was he distinguishing that from, or the industry was distinguishing what a specialist car was?
Well, Michael, you could probably answer that better than me, because you spent 30 years putting people into the driving seat of just those type of cars when they could have bought a Lexus or something mainstream.
Yeah,
I'm sorry, I'm not trying to pin it on you, but you probably know the mindset of what makes people think a car is special.
I think it's a sense you get when you get in and drive. Now, I'm very biased, of course, because I get in the Jaguar and I immediately feel special, particularly the earlier cars. I think there's an ambiance to it. There's a feeling of refinement and power that you get. And I think and the fact is, I think they probably generally built one less than the market could stand.
Right.
So there was
that was the ideal production number
of exclusivity to it as well.
Expression before, yeah.
Although Grandad was constantly trying to push volume up.
Right.
They could have sold a lot more cars than they did, particularly when XJ6 came out. That was a major problem. But a specialist car, I think, is producing a car that is applicable to everyday living, that will tick all the boxes of whether you're going to work or taking the family to school or going on holiday or going out for a sporty drive. It ticks all those boxes, but it does it in such a way that it's a cut above the run-of-the-mill.
Yeah, it's a different experience.
It's a slightly more refined, pleasurable experience that maybe makes you feel quite good about the decisions you've made.
Yeah.
And when he's giving this address in 1969, in a way, Britain's it's the bastion of the specialist car more than anywhere else. I mean, there's hardly any independent car makers in the States any longer. Very few in France. Sweden, Germany, Britain's got everything, hasn't it? It's got Lotus, Lyons, Aston Martin, Bristol,
You mentioned Morgan.
Morgan, yes, Caterham. I mean, where do we stop with this great list of if you had a car guide of 1969. You know, the sort of the British section. There's so much in it.
Yeah.
So I think he's also talking a little bit. Michael, I don't know if you agree with me, a little bit about the independence of thought in what you're making, and not just great big stamping things, turning out tin cans that were, in a way, you know, if it was now, everything would be robot fitted.
Sure.
I think he's talking about a degree of a kind of customization and personalization. How would the customer want it? I don't think they actually did too much in the way of bespoke stuff, did they?
Not really.
They did tend to sort of, the cars were a set package, but there was a good choice of engines. You think of the Mark II, you've got a Weedy 2.4, you've got a fire-breathing 3.8, and then there's a Daimler one. So there was always plenty to, if you're at the dealer, you know, sitting down with your cup of coffee and the guy's going through all the leather and all the choices, that's Ford did that for a couple of years with the Capri, and then they stopped, because I think everyone involved in that process probably found it didn't make enough money, and they couldn't charge a premium for the car because it was a tin can, unlike the Jag. So the Capri did a little bit of that, but they all actually stepped away from that in the late 70s. So I think he was to go back to your original question, Gareth. And sorry, I'm probably over talking this, but I think he was probably grappling with that. You know, where do we go when big guys try to make a specialist car?
And we mentioned the Mustang earlier on, and that was a sort of indicator that the specialist cars were no longer the sole thing of the specialists. There were the mainstream were also getting in on that business.
He mentions one really obscure car in there called the AMX Javelin, which was a new car in '69, and I think it was a bit of a failure. Really, it didn't last for long, but it was obviously another new threat on the horizon from somebody. AMC, probably the smallest of the Americans, wondering how they were going to survive, perhaps taking a leaf out of the Jaguar book itself. So I get the feeling he's looking around thinking, right, you know, how do I deal with it all?
Yeah. And he talks about, when he talks about the specialist car, he talks about what a specialist car manufacturer needs to survive at that time. I think he makes 4 points. And I wondered, you know, how relevant do you think they are today, the sort of things he was saying about a specialist car. One of the things he talks about is the need to innovate and move forward and things like that. Give the customer a special experience. And is that still relevant today, do you think? Or?
What a massive question. Oh my goodness. I mean, things today seem to be in such turmoil in terms of, you know, the car choosing ownership and user experience that it's like talking about the Wright brothers versus the space shuttle.
Yeah.
You know, I mean, if it was around today, would Sir William be thinking, how is the Jaguar autonomous pod going to interact with those who lease it? You know, rather than who's going to buy a sports saloon. I find that very difficult. I feel like we've been forced so far away from the Jaguar world as he saw it at this time that it's. I'd be fascinated to know how he'd respond. You know, I think it would be. I think it would be an opportunity for a free-thinking person like he was to say, how do we take today and, you know, make something that someone wants? You know?
Well, I think he would definitely be. He was always an embracer of new technology.
Sure.
And not in this paper, but there are other comments that he made. For example, talking about the instigator of ABS braking and how that was going to be a major advancement for safety. And he also wrote a curious passage about presaging the electric car as well.
Right.
Really?
Now, obviously, yeah. So, I mean, obviously, electric cars go back to the dawn of motoring, as we know.
Yeah.
But he could see that there was the alternative modes of propulsion would definitely arrive, and I think he would be embracing that.
Mm-hmm.
And anything that gave his products an edge,
Yeah.
he would definitely view that as the right way to go.
Okay. I mean, interesting. I mean, we'll have to sort of almost put this in context. I was playing around with the dates today, this morning, and you have to remember when he made that speech in '69, his company was 47 years old. We've actually had a longer period since then. We've had 56 years since then, and you know, sort of almost you've got to remember that that's how far ago it was. Is there any, I mean, do you think when he's talking about the specialist car, there are things that we can learn from that today, that some of the points he makes? I mean, we touched on, you know, innovation and stuff like that.
Well, without wishing to be, I don't want to verge on being critical of previous management.
Yeah.
I think there have been some decisions taken which really rather veered away from where he would have taken the company.
Right.
I think there was too much focus on trying to tackle some of the major competitors head on, who back in his day were not major competitors. Frankly.
Sure.
They were much smaller companies. I'm thinking particularly some of the ones from Germany.
Mm-hmm.
But of course they expanded rapidly and grew in influence and market share. And I think there's been a bit too much preoccupation with trying to tackle them head on.
Yeah, I mean, when you think that Mercedes and BMW make about 2 million cars a year, and Jaguar are at the moment, they're not making cars, but even when they were in recent years, it's been 100,000, 200,000 at most, I think.
Totally different ball game, really, when you look at it like that. And I think that what they did, sadly, it was to take their eye off the ball of being a specialist car maker.
Right.
I think they should have not been sucked into trying to mass produce, but kept it smaller, kept that edge that produce something that was more, that offered an alternative, a really a premium alternative. I think that's where potentially it's.
Yeah, I agree with you totally. But you also have to remember Jaguar itself was a victim of circumstance in the 1970s. Sir William had, you know, quite rightly retired by then, or sort of retired, even though he couldn't stay away entirely. And then, because it was one of the bits of British lowland that had notionally the least problems, it got left. And so, and here I'm going to have a bit of a pop at people who moan and groan about Jaguar of late and say, oh, a traditional Jaguar has got to be this. That whole Jaguar tradition of it's only this shape and it's only these colours and it's this type of trim, that was because it all was in a bit of stasis for 10 years, XJS accepted, I think, you know, and had Sir William been able to really exert his influence there and had the energy to do it, he wouldn't have let those cars become living antiques. Yeah. You know, you think of the Series 3 XJ6 of 79, I mean, that's, that car then has to... that has to last for another 7 years. You know, he would have been looking, in my opinion, and Michael, you probably know better than me, but he would have been looking well over the horizon at, you know, what we do next to. And I
always thought that, even take it further down the line, when Ford owned Jaguar and they had the S-Type and the X-Type, really that wasn't taking the company forward, though. In terms of design, they were, you know, living on impulse. Which brings us, of course, to the future. And, you know, we saw the prototype that was shown late last year, created an awful lot of publicity. I wondered what your take was on that, and also what would Sir William have thought of it?
Well, in terms of the shape of the Type 00, I mean, all we've seen so far is a concept. So I think it will evolve. I mean, they say it's very close to what we will see next year, is it? I think
we've obviously not seen anything other than that then. So.
I've not seen anything other than that concept, no. So I've not seen a working production, a finished model yet, no. So I sort of slightly withhold some judgment on that. There are aspects of it that I really like. I love the rear three-quarter view. The overall feel of it has some really interesting aspects. I mean, the low roof line is very SS, which is what, my grandfather was very keen on that. In fact, warmly raised the roof on the first production car when my granddad was in hospital.
Right.
Having his appendix out. He came back.
It's a lovely story. Yeah,
that's a great story. Yeah. So it has elements of that. I mean, I'm not sure actually what made the biggest splash, whether it was the viewing of the Type 00 concept or the method in which they...
Yeah, the bit beforehand with all the models.
They sought to remind the world that Jaguar was out there, and they came up with a rather interesting method to do that. I think that made the biggest splash and obviously upset an awful lot of people, which sadly I think might have had a bit of an inflection on the car when that was then launched. But for me, I think they're being bold. Mm-hmm. And I think they need to be bold. I think Jaguar have been making great cars over the last 10, 20 years to drive, but the fact is they just weren't selling.
No, and going back to slightly what we were just talking about, you look at BMW, Mercedes, Audi, they're selling 2 million cars a year. Mm. They can do a petrol, they can do a diesel, they can do a hybrid, they can do an electric. They can afford to invest in all of that. Whereas Jaguar are obviously selling 100,000 cars a year, something like that. Yeah. They ain't got the resources to do all that. So certainly at the time they decided to go pure electric, they had to put their eggs in one basket. And I think, it's easy to... You have to almost put it in that context.
Mm. Mercedes have a big truck and vans business, which probably makes all the money anyway. Yeah. And actually in here, Sir William is very much on the right lines because he was building a commercial vehicle business in the 60s very quietly that we.
So Guy trucks, Meadows engines,
and Daimler buses,
Coventry Climax.
He talks about all the takeovers.
So those that would have provided quite a good counterbalance to because those sort of vehicles are business to business vehicles. Yeah. The Jaguar is a business to consumer vehicle, and the economic cycles go like this, and hopefully when one is up, the other one's down, and so on. That was. I initially used to wonder what on earth he was doing when he was doing that, instead of making more cars. But there's a bit of interesting wisdom about that. And as I said earlier, Mercedes really do rely on their lorries to bring the bacon home. Sure. And BMW probably on the motorbikes and the minis do help. Everything else they're doing. Yeah. So the critical mass. Has been lost, and if you think of what's happened in the last 5 years, the rise of Tesla, this year we've got something like 9 new brands of Chinese car for sale in this country that have just come from nowhere. Yeah,
it's been very noticeable the last few months how many suddenly, I don't know what that is, but it must be Chinese.
Yes.
I've seen that so many times,
And if you're just a car consumer and just regard it as a sort of a white goods on wheels, i.e. not a Jaguar, you're interested in these things because they're $5,000 less than a Peugeot. Mm-hmm. So people may lambast the current management for starting again from scratch, but I think they don't have any alternative but to think boldly about it, because as you say, if they continued on what they were doing, I think they would have gone. Hit financial problems in a different way. Sure, probably. So it's. But it remains a very unusual situation, doesn't it? Where you have a world-leading brand where you start again with a totally blank sheet of paper. That's very unusual, really, for that to happen. So should we give them give them a chance to succeed?
Oh, I think very much so. I think one thing that has struck me with obviously with electric cars have become very mainstream. Electric cars, to me, give you the opportunity to, because the motor doesn't have to be in a certain place, you can move components about.
Yes.
And yet, what we've seen as pure electric cars are still the same conventional shapes. So I wonder if a Jaguar, and the only other one I've seen that seems to think about a different shape is some of the Hondas that we've seen as prototypes.
Yes.
And there's an opportunity to do that. Now, the car market is very conservative. It's a risk. I mean, it's a risk all round. But I do think there's an opportunity there to actually almost make us think differently about the way cars are made.
Yeah, you don't need a bonnet if the electric motors are in the wheels, do you?
Well, Ian Callan got this, and in fact, the I-Pace was in fact a fantastic product, and that is very much more cabin forward and gives much more space inside. It's not a car I'm particularly familiar with, but everyone who I have spoken to who has one have loved them.
Yeah.
And they're still a very popular buy. So he was definitely thinking along those lines.
Sure.
And in fact, it's a shame in a way they didn't develop that car
I think
further.
so, because friends of mine who've got them love them, and I just always wonder if they'd turned the factory into a bit of a destination, so that you could go along and you could be part of the build process. Each one could be almost a little bit done to the individual. You know, in the way that Morgan operates. I know that's a tiny scale compared to Jaguar, but it brings you into it, doesn't it? It makes you a sort of Morgan disciple, and keeps you faithful to it. Yeah, and that's what I'd love to see with Jaguar, is that people stick with it and love the cars as they have done with all the classic models we've been talking about. That would be my hope. Touch wood.
Well, that's the impression I get. Sorry, Gareth. I get the impression they are going in that direction. There's a lot of talk about the price point and how it might be sort of 150,000, which you might think, well, that's not very Jaguar. That's an awful lot of money and very exclusive. But in fact, if you look around what's available at the moment, 150 is not really that much.
That's right. And also, I mean, I've had some involvement with the Mulliner division at Bentley, and going up to that place. Oh my goodness, people get so hooked on creating their cars. They love to go there. They absolutely love it. And they need the guys actually crafting all the personalisation bits. Spend a day at the factory. Go to the canteen with them. You never buy another car after you've done it.
No, Rolls-Royce are doing very much the same. I mean, you look at the list price of Rolls-Royces, £300,000. But the average price that leaves the factory is £500,000, because people spend so much on personalising and what have you.
Well, that is a super opportunity for Jaguar. That is. Yeah. And I almost think that's a growth thing. Which would be accompanied by even more nice places to stay in Warwickshire while you're there.
So we're feeling excited about the new Jaguars that are coming then? Or are you
pensive?
Just pensive?
Yeah, slightly.
Well, it has to be pensive. Because
Yeah.
it's a whole new world. But
Yeah, I'm slightly apprehensive too.
right.
Well, I'm worried because it's a thing I love.
Yeah, sure.
I've driven quite a few Jags, and can I say Jags?
You can say Jags.
Okay, right.
You can say Jags.
All right. I don't want to make a faux pas.
You've also admitted, Giles, you don't want to go back to the leather and wood trim.
Oh no, I do quite like that. Yes.
Yeah, but not on a modern car.
Well,
Well, I don't think they will have leather and wood trim.
Yeah.
I mean, there may be some wood in there, but I think there's going to be some really interesting materials.
Fabrics,
Yeah.
but it means a lot to me, because I've been a classic car journalist for 40 years this week.
Wow.
Congratulations.
Thank you very much. That's when I started on classic and sports cars, the T-boy.
Drinks are on you.
Well, the teas are on me. We, from my very first day there, a Jaguar was one of the half a dozen things that would get cover status. Sedan, Mini Cooper, whatever, Porsche 356, 911. I've been focused on Jags for decades.
Right.
And of course, when I was a kid, I don't think I realised all that I do now. I used to see them around, as a child, and they were always very impressive and made a nice noise. But only when I got into the sort of car media did I realise the pull that it has on people. The stories of the racing, the cars themselves on the road, all the enjoyment and thrills they've given to people. Amazing export. The talent that comes from Jaguar and Jaguar Land Rover as well, that goes off to do other things. It's all there's so much of it, really. And again, we've only got a tiny amount of that little distilled part of it in this book. But if you do care to read his works, I think you get a renewed understanding of what it's all about.
So to wrap up then, I enjoyed reading the book. I thought the address is fascinating, and obviously you've enhanced it with your end piece where you talk about how it progressed from there, etc.
Let me stop you there, though, because when I talked this address into a Word document to make the manuscript of the book, I was very careful to keep all the archaic punctuation, terms, formality, and all the rest of it.
Right.
And I said to the publisher, I think we need to have Sir William's words in a bigger font than both the intro stuff and my postscript at the end. So, we've made the text a bit bigger, because this is actually only 9,500 words. Quite small for a book. But I think the way that the designer has tackled it...
It's all very, very large print, isn't it? Whereas...
and it's not just because of my eyesight.
No. This is your bit at the end, commentary. You can see the difference in the size.
Wait, what about my forward?
That's also in the same small size, I'm afraid. But it is at the front.
No, that's only appropriate. That's fine.
So we had a lovely designer called Julian Balm, who's done some superb books and record covers in the past, and he was the right person to work with the material to do something a bit different. And I think it is different to the other Jaguar books, of which there are dozens, if not hundreds.
Absolutely.
And many of them are just unbelievably good.
Yeah.
Even Andrew White's book, which he wrote with Sir William's approval, is actually very interesting because it's so personal to all the people involved. I was just very anxious that we did something that added to that canon, and very lucky to be able to work with Michael on it too.
Sure.
So, because I did have to ask your permission, really. And you very kindly said that you thought that he would think it'd be okay.
Absolutely.
I mean, it's a very unique book. Just to finish, is there anything similar down the line, or I say similar? I mean, it's unique. You can't really do a different. Someone else's speech somewhere else you probably don't even have. But I wondered if there's any more Jaguar ephemera out there, Michael, you might have that we might see in the future in publishing or published or out on the market.
Well, he did start to write his own history, which is more his own history as opposed to the company history. Obviously, they're incredibly intertwined. But he only got as far as the Second World War.
Right.
So, although it's really interesting what he's written, it's not a very complete tale, sadly. So there's that floating around in the back of my mind. I'm not quite sure what to do with that. And also, there's quite a lot of correspondence that I found at his home after he passed away that I've rescued. And I'm still sort of going through that, like some of these letters that I showed you earlier. So I don't know whether there's a book in it.
Right.
It feels like there might be
something that we can get out of.
Yeah. And a couple of interesting speeches he made here and there, one of which I referred to just now, which I'll share with you. You might be interested to read it.
Okay.
But the history of Jaguar has been pretty well covered.
Yeah, of course. Obviously,
Yeah.
And Giles, have you got anything out there that's anything in the pipeline?
In the same vein?
Well, possibly, or anything else that's
Well,
Going to be slightly different to what we've normally seen?
nothing again quite like this, because I think if you set out to find this kind of thing with an intention to do that, you're very unlikely to find it.
You stumbled across it.
You stumble across it, yes, exactly. And I have got some interesting Land Rover papers from a former British Army colonel who was hired for 5 years to try and boost sales of Land Rovers, and I've got all his internal memos to the point where he storms out because they won't take any notice of his recommendations, which is to build a big beefy pickup like a Dodge to take on the Americans in the world market. So it's quite interesting because they're unpublished papers, but I mean it's just a bit of a cat's cradle to know how I can sort of turn that into a book. I've got another book I've just finished in a very different vein about cars in the 60s, but nothing has been quite like this to do. This has been totally unique in all the things I've done.
Well, and let me say, I think you've done a great job of it. So.
Oh, thanks. Team effort, really, including the designer and the publisher Zebra, who backed
I think some of the pictures in there are fascinating. I love some of the pictures. Well, Michael, Giles, thank you very much for your time. It's been fascinating talking to you. And maybe we'll talk again some other time when we see the next episode.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Well, great, thank you.